There's a whole heap of techniques you can use to catch Murray cod, but one of my favourite techniques is just spinnerbaiting for them. And over the last couple of years, with wake baiting and switch baiting, I've actually went and re-looked at all my spinnerbait tactics, and I came up with something that's really quite new. What it is if you're actually wake baiting or swim baiting for cod, you use a system of switch baiting, which means if your cod follows your wake bait and turns away, you don't want to go and recast that same lure in the same spot. What you want to do is quickly grab something else. Grab a swim bait, grab a paddler, or grab maybe a spinnerbait and recast that and then elicit the bite. But one of the problems I found with traditional spinnerbaits in this situation with big cod is that spinnerbait just wasn't big enough for me. And if I got a really, really big one, they stank too fast and got snagged too easily. So this is all about how I've developed suspending spinnerbaiting. And what you need is a big spinnerbait. Sort of spinnerbaits you use is something like this. This is a Molix from America. You can use something like a Western. And what makes them a little bit different to the run-of-the-mill big spinnerbait is they're not actually all that heavy in the head. This is only a 1 ounce head, and that's about what you want. Maybe 3/4 of an ounce through to 1 ounce through to 1.5 ounce maximum. You don't really want 2.5 ounce heavier spinnerbaits. They won't suspend, they'll just sink too quickly. So how do we make them suspend? Well, it's the bulk of the skirt. A lot of these American mega spinnerbaits have really, really good preformed skirts on them. You can see the bulk of that skirt there. Got a lot of mylar in it. It's got very, very high quality silicone and lots of it. I've got one here, standard spinnerbait here, which I've rigged up to do the same job, but you can see the difference in both the skirt, the length of the skirt, the bulk of the skirt. You can see what I mean there. Now this has got a bit of a tag on it, just ignore that for the moment, but just look at the two spinnerbait skirts that you need. Big, and that takes time to drop down through the water column, and what that's going to mean is you can actually cast out to your cod and control the drop. You can actually slow your retrieve right down and be confident that it's just not going to crash to the bottom and maybe just get snagged up too easily. You can just roll that in there, hold it in the strike zone and just run it back. The other important thing about my big spinnerbaits for Murray cod is the sort of blade you use, and I just like Colorado blades. They work better, slower. On a really slow crank, they're still gonna just rock over. You don't need to crank them in really quick. Produce a lot of vibration, a lot of flash, and a lot of bulk. And then again, that's the other thing we're after with this whole system is bulk. Guys who fish wake baits, big swim baits up to 10 inches or bigger, there's bulk to them. So there's just one here. Here's another spinnerbait that I've got, which is a Savage, and you can see here the difference between the two blades. So this is a blade I like. It's got a Colorado blade on it, and of course here is the willow leaf or thinner blade, which is more suited to faster retrieves. It's often called an Indiana blade as well, so willow leaf or Indiana blade. But if you can, get these nice big Colorado blades. Lastly, what you've got to do to increase the bulk of this whole system, which I showed you just before, is we actually add a worm stinger on it. So all of a sudden, you've got a spinnerbait with a 10-inch worm on a stinger hook, which I'll show you how to rig in a minute, and the whole bulk of that system, you've got a nice big piece of animal in the water to attract those Murray cod. Good profile. 10 inch of bait here, probably the whole length of this item is probably well over 12 inches, more towards 14 inches long, without all the weight and bulk that you need. And of course, the float of the worm hook and the rest of it just means this just slowly will suspend through the water column, and you can just control your drift down to your fish. Okay? So the trick to rigging a spinnerbait, just like this one, is you need a few things. You're obviously going to need a stinger hook, and then you're going to need a couple of these little rubber stoppers to put on it. That's just going to hold the stinger hook where it is and stop it from coming back off your main hook here as well. Okay, now the sort of hooks you need to use as a stinger can be a little bit varied, but essentially they're all got to be a straight hook, and there are 3 different hooks you can use. You could use just a standard J hook, something like that. You can use a Siwash, which is a parallel larger gape hook with a finer point and has the advantage of having a larger eye. Or you can use what I prefer to normally use is a large standard worm hook. Now the only problem with the large standard worm hook is that the eyelet is a lot smaller than the other 2, and you can see the size of them there. So these 2 hooks will go over your spinnerbait hook or through the spinnerbait hook without a problem. But with your worm hook, not going to go through. So we're going to have to open this guy up, but your standard worm hook is the one I prefer. So with the worm hook, you need to open up the eye, and I bet you a lot of you have got a pair of pliers like this, and you may have wondered, just apart from using the pliers to get lures out of fish safely, just what are these little caps in the middle here? Well, what they are for is actually opening up the eye on a hook. Just carefully. There you go. Nice and simple. And all you do is you can use 2 of those little stoppers if you want, or you can just grab hold of one like I've got right here and just cut it in half, which is pretty simple to do. And then before you put your stinger hook on, you simply roll one of these just carefully so you don't hook yourself up. They're pretty tight. So you just roll that on to your spinnerbait. Once it's on, just roll it around there. Grab hold of my stinger hook, which is a worm hook, standard American worm hook, which I prefer to use. Just pop that on there. Just sit it to where you want it to go. Get the other half of the stopper. Just pop that on the hook point. And just roll that in there as well. There you go, and then just press those 2 together. And then what's that's going to do is just going to hold your stinger hook there, and that's just all ready to put your worm on. Now one thing I like to do is actually put a bit of spiket on it, and in this case I'm going to go black, and it's garlic, and then as I said, just put a bit of spiket scent and a bit of colour on those stoppers like so. And then you're just ready to put on a worm. And I've got a few different worms. You get them from America. This is a 7-inch exo ribbon. These bittens are 10 inches long. And as I said, these are just standard big worms. These are 7-inch. These ones, there's some bigger ones here which are 10s as well, and they're really going to add to that float. Here we go, that's what I wanted. So we're just going to run one of these on this bait. Which is really quite simple. Now all you've got to do is just separate that out a bit. Run your worm standard style. So I just want to run that through there, just out there. So there you go. That's how to rig a big suspending spinnerbait. Ideal for big cod. So you can use that bait as a follow-up if you're switch baiting, or like I do, I tend to use it for most of my fishing, most of the time on the lake. It's my preferred option. First off, I just like fishing these big spinnerbaits for big cod. Really exciting. You can fish them just under the surface, or you can just suspend them right down to any depth you want. Gives you a lot of options you don't get with sinking swim baits and floating wake baits. So there you have it, suspending spinnerbaits, a profile at least 12 inches long, ideal for big cod. See you on the water.